Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out on this beautiful, warm Monday afternoon to join us for this event. My name is Camille Crittenden, and I am delighted to welcome you to CITRIS and to co-sponsor on behalf of the Data and Democracy Initiative. I am delighted that the Matsui Forum is here and sponsoring this really exciting talk about tweeting your way to the White House, social media, and the 2012 campaign. I am going to take just a couple minutes to say a few things about the Matsui Center and about the Data and Democracy Initiative, share a couple of upcoming events, and then we'll move right on to the panel discussion. I'll turn it over to Ethan Rarick, who's the director of the Matsui Center. The Matsui Center is part of the Institute of Governmental Studies and seeks to involve Cal undergraduates in politics, public policy, and public service. In addition to public events like these, the center sponsors internship programs in federal, state, and local government. And students interested in the internship program should go to the center's website, or I saw there were some brochures on the table outside if they'd like to get more information. The Data and Democracy Initiative here at CITRIS was recently launched earlier this summer, and I'm excited to be working with faculty members Ken Goldberg and Greg Niemeyer, in addition to a couple of others at UC Santa Cruz. The Data and Democracy Initiative intends to build tools that will help to empower citizens to get more information about decisions and policies that will affect them, and to provide information back to those policymakers on a range of political and economic and social issues. We invite you after this presentation to stay for a reception in the lobby, the atrium, and to check out a couple of posters and other election-related apps that will be on display there. I hope you'll find them intriguing. The posters come from some undergraduate students who are in an internet citizenship class this semester, students of Greg Niemeyer, so I think you'll find those projects interesting. I also want to highlight a project that the Data and Democracy Initiative is sponsoring, and that's a Prop 30 awareness campaign or project. There are postcards about this also on the table. It's a fun interactive tool that means to raise awareness about what is on the California ballot by using an interactive app that you can put your email address into the website and to test your influence and rapid mobilization of your social networks. So check it out. Just a few words about some upcoming events. Stay tuned if you'd like to after the reception to come right back here at 7:30 for a really great talk on data visualization with a couple of really key innovators, Fernanda Villegas and Martin Wattenberg. This talk is part of the Art, Technology, and Culture lecture series that is sponsored by the Berkeley Center for New Media. At noon on Thursday, in a related event, we are also co-sponsoring with the Berkeley Center for New Media a talk with David Karpf, who will discuss the move-on effect, the unexpected transformation of American political advocacy. So we're excited to have David here. And finally, the Matsui Center, you saw the list earlier, is sponsoring a number of election-related events, including debate watching parties and election night returns. So be sure to check out their list of upcoming events as well. So for tonight, I just want to really acknowledge and thank our co-sponsors. In addition to the Matsui Center, who is really sponsoring the event, I want to thank CITRIS, also the Berkeley Center for New Media, the Schools of Journalism and Information, the Center for Civility and Democratic Engagement at the Goldman School, the Media Studies Program, and the Berkeley College Republicans. The Democrats were also invited to sponsor, but they had another event tonight, so lest you think that we're only highlighting one of the parties, they were both invited to present. So, just a word about the protocol for tonight. After the panel discussion, we will be taking questions from the audience. You probably saw or received one of the little note cards. Feel free to raise those in the air when the time comes, or because this is all about tweeting your way to the White House, also feel free to tweet your questions using the hashtag Matsui Forum 2012, and I'll be monitoring that Twitter flow, so we'd be delighted for you to enter your questions or comments that way as well. So at this point, I'll turn it over to...
Just as they tell me my microphone is off, but I think it's on. Okay. I'm going to not really introduce the panelists. There is more. There are bios on each of them in your program, so if you want to read more about them, but I'll just tell you very briefly. On the far end is Daniel Kreiss, who's a professor of journalism and mass communication at the University of North Carolina and the author of Taking Our Country Back, The Crafting of Networked Politics from Howard Dean to Barack Obama, which touches on the development of new media in politics. Next to Daniel is Theo Yedinsky, who now works mostly not in political consulting, instead actually works in new media as with Social Stream and with North Social. However, he's also a political consultant, having worked on many campaigns, including most recently the Gavin Newsom for Governor campaign. Next to Theo is Katie Merrill, who's the head of her own consulting firm here in Berkeley, the Merrill Strategy Group. She's worked on many, many Democratic campaigns. We were just talking about Bill Bradley for president, the Phil Angelides for governor campaign. She worked on Ellen Tauscher's first campaign for Congress, was later Tauscher's chief of staff, so forth. And then next to me is David Aul, who's the founder of the David Aul Group, a consulting firm, and is also a former political consultant, having worked for George Voinovich in Ohio. So a variety of experiences here, academic and practical, and having worked in politics and now working in new media. So I'm going to begin by asking each of the panelists just to talk briefly, and then I want you all to jump in as you want. So don't stand on ceremony. But I want each of you to just briefly talk about what's the biggest single change you've seen in politics as the result of the development of social media. David, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Well, first off, let me thanks for this opportunity. It's been a year or so since I've talked about politics. I'm a Republican consultant, so thanks to the College Republicans for sponsoring this. And it's also nice to climb into the belly of the beast here in Berkeley. So I expect a lot of fun will be had. So I did a lot of work on for a lot of candidates. I'm known for helping pioneer the use of social media in politics in Washington, D.C. And we've been working on that for 6 years, and then prior to that as a political consultant. And I think the number one thing that I always noticed back when I was a campaign manager for a congressional campaign in 2001 and just started to use the internet then is that there were 25 or 30 people who would always show up to your congressional headquarters to help. And they had very specific tasks that they wanted to accomplish. And so you couldn't have the ladies who wanted to do the phone calls do the yard signs, for example, as the classical organizing that I'm talking about here. And so that sort of understanding stuck with me throughout my entire history. And the fact that there were hundreds of people online, regardless of the campaign size you were working on, that had a whole sort of broad range of time that they could help out and a broad range of capabilities. And no matter what, they all agreed on one thing, and that was helping you reach your objective. And a lot of folks didn't actually know how to do that. So to me, social media and the use of new media, to answer your question directly, has really empowered the activists who sit at home. I mean, it's the stay-at-home moms who have 5 or 10 minutes a day to pop onto a website or write a blog or submit a letter to the editor to a newspaper or something like that. It all takes an effect, and I'm sure we're going to hear a lot about that from some of the other panelists.
Mm-hmm. Katie?
I think I would say that, and this is a bit of an overstatement, but that social media has democratized politics, or perhaps it's re-democratized politics. So similar to what David was saying, there are plenty of people in the world who want to be engaged, want to know about issues, want to know about candidates, and because they are busy with their lives and they're not people like me who live and breathe this stuff, they have always needed a place to go to get information. And as our lives have gotten busier and busier and busier in the 21st century, it is harder and harder and harder, which is why you will hear undecided voters at this point in the campaign being described as, busy working moms who simply have not had time. I mean, many people in this room are probably thinking, who in the world could be an undecided voter right now, October 1st, 2012, right? And Saturday Night Live did a great skit a couple weekends ago about who the undecided voter was. Right. But in fact, they are extremely busy people living their lives who care, they just haven't had time. So the great thing about social media is that for the 15 minutes, again, sort of broad-based example, overbroad example, but that the working mom can get on Facebook at 11:15 and see what her friends are posting about the presidential campaign, a governor's race, the congressional campaign, an initiative in California. She's now able to get her information in a way that she wasn't getting it before. If she was getting it at all, helps her make a decision. Perhaps many of you have been on an email thread or at a neighborhood thing over the years where someone has said, you know, I just need someone like, hey, you're involved. Tell me how I should vote on these 11 initiatives. Well, now you get that on Facebook. So to me, it has, and the activist piece is a huge part of it. But even for the regular voter, I think it has democratized politics in a way we haven't seen in a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with both of those things. I mean, those are big fundamental changes. And I guess I would say on a macro level, right, if you just look at the overall numbers, you know, I think it was in the spring of 2009 that the monthly traffic of Twitter actually exceeded the monthly traffic of the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post combined. I think it was those three. And that took about 18 months. And so that's kind of, if you think about it on a macro scale, that's kind of what both David and Katie were saying, right, is it's a fundamental change, sort of who holds the power in politics. And, and that's, the Twitter number is oversimplifying it a little bit, but if you think about the sort of enormity of that statement, which is that this, little website, right, that, no one heard of a few years ago actually communicated and talked with and interacted with more people on a daily basis than the 3 papers of record of the entire 20th century. And that's kind of an unbelievable fact. So I think, fundamentally, the biggest change is the power structure and where the power structures lie. And, and that's more of that's a social thing as well. I would say the other thing, let's go down to a real micro level, which what both Katie and David were also saying, is just fundamentally the sharing aspect and the sharing of images, honestly, even. If you want to go from the top all the way down to the bottom, everybody has ready access to their network immediately. I mean, instantaneously. Twitter, Facebook, whatever it is. I mean, I can basically, I have 1,123 friends on Facebook. I could tell them instantly, when I leave here in an hour, my most recent thought about Mitt Romney or Barack Obama, and I never had that possibility before. And the other tools that go around that have created a tremendous amount of sharing, and a lot of that is image-based, photos. I mean, those things are really moving. And if you, today actually, ironically enough, Instagram passed Twitter, right, for the daily active users per daily active users. So there are more daily active users on Instagram right now than there are on Twitter, which is also kind of a mind-boggling stat.
You mean I've just been learning Twitter and now I've got to learn Instagram?
Yeah, it's over. It's done. Hopefully you sold your shares in it early on the private market. Yeah. But that just speaks, I think, to the power of photos, which I think, and imagery, which I think is a big driver of a lot of this, and is sort of a very, small ball thing, but that ends up playing a big role. I would say those two top and bottom factors.
I guess I'm in the unenviable position of coming last after really 3 very accomplished folks. I'll just pick up a couple threads, I guess, from what other folks have saying and maybe talk a little bit more about them. To my eyes, one of the biggest shifts has been 25 years ago, the big concern among political scientists was essentially democracy without citizens. We feared a world where expensive negative advertising campaigns were shaping the electorate. We feared a world where direct mail was narrowly targeting messages to voters on the basis of what people knew about them. And we feared a world where professional consultants were managing much of democratic processes and campaigns. Contrast that to where we are today, where certainly many of the themes that you guys have been talking about, re-democratizing political processes, having more people participating, lowering the costs of people to do things like give time, give money to candidates that they favor, et cetera. So I certainly think on one big level we have to think about social media as lowering the cost of many forms of traditional political participation, giving people those 5 minutes in the middle of the day that they have available to do something. And also, I think, and this is just to add a little bit onto this, is that part of the story that David told, one was where people can sort of do things from home, but also campaigns use social media to get people out into field offices, get people out into knocking on doors. And that's been an important component of this, because over the last decade, we've seen a reinvestment in field campaigning, certainly at the presidential level, reinvestment in canvassing, going door to door. At the same time, I would also I see a bit more of a complicated picture. So we do have a world where people are sharing things that they're producing on Twitter and Instagram. But we also see a world where
journalists from organizations like the New York Times, professionals have their own brands on places like Twitter, are producing content that then gets shared in social networks. You know, both campaigns, I think, at the presidential level, do a lot of work on Twitter to circulate messages about their opponent's record in the hopes that their supporters will then retweet that and circulate that within their own social networks, hoping to invest that with more credibility. So I think that it's a complicated hybrid system where it's not just about citizens, but citizens are interacting with professional institutions, interacting with campaigns. And information is being passed back and forth between lots of people watching one another. And at the end of the day, and I think that this is an interesting part of debate, is both how much can social media sort of help campaigns win higher office. I'm a little bit more skeptical about that. That an effective social media strategy would be the thing that carries the election. That happens in combination with many other things like the state of the economy, et cetera. But also sort of, is the citizen really empowered? And I think that that's something that we need to think critically about. Are candidates more accountable in terms of their policy positions than they were in the past? I think that's an open question in a lot of ways, and one I would love to hear your perspectives on.
There's a lot of stuff there to pick up on. Let me ask you, sort of following up on your point about are citizens really empowered? I mean, Theo, you mentioned it changes who holds the power. But of course, I mean, in politics, at the end of the day, the people who vote are the people who hold the power. And I wonder whether or not if somebody's on Twitter or on Facebook, does that really change? Does that really have an effect on whether or not they show up and vote, or whether they make a donation, or whether they do something concrete? Because surely you can be on Twitter and you can tweet, but if you don't do anything more than that, does that really increase your participation? So I'm curious, have any of you seen, I mean, do you really see social media make a difference in who shows up to vote, or who gives money, or who shows up to do concrete things? Other than empowering the activists who, I guess the 25 people show up. But does it go beyond that, or is it just people tweeting?
Well, I mean, I guess I would say the Newsom campaign, and this is...
Yeah, you had a lot of Twitter followers. He was well known for...
Yeah, I mean, Newsom had 1.2 or 1.3 million, but at the time we also had the largest Facebook page for any non-presidential candidate in the country. And so we actually we built a tremendously large email list, and so there was definitely a ladder of engagement. I mean, people, if you asked them on email, make a donation or take an action or volunteer, come to an event, you had a higher response rate. And then if you went down to Facebook, you had a low response rate, and then obviously the least action item was on Twitter. Now, that was probably a little skewed because at the time, Twitter was going up like a hockey stick, and Newsom was one of the first people on it, and they had suggested followers, and we were amassing 20, 30,000 followers a day. It was insane. And so, were all those people there to see Gavin Newsom? Probably not. Whereas on Facebook and email, we were really directly soliciting that. But there was definitely a ladder where the most concrete actions come off of email, and I would say you'll probably still see that today. I mean, I still see that today we posted a note on Facebook for I'm doing a gubernatorial campaign in New Hampshire. It's the most competitive gubernatorial campaign in the country right now. If we send out an email, we'll drive a lot more donations than if we post that on Facebook. I mean, there's definitely a difference.
But email is in a way the old web, right? I mean, email is yesterday's thing, right? It's not social. No, it still is.
I mean, you want to say
something? Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say that's a heck of a political consultant, huh? The most competitive race in the country.
Well, it is.
So if you guys remember in 2009 when Joe Wilson yelled, "You lie," on the floor, do you guys remember that? Sort of. Okay, so they called me to do his response. And so I came in the next day.
To do Wilson's response.
To do Joe Wilson's response. Okay. And so...
This is, in case somebody does, some people said they do, but just explain quickly. This is the State of the Union address.
Yeah, State of the Union. It's about health care. And Congressman Joe Wilson, who's a immigration lawyer by trade, yelled, "You lie," during a point about how the health care law would affect illegal immigrants. And in fact, the White House later put out a statement saying, well, he was right. But anyway, long story short, they called me to respond. Act Blue and Move On and Nancy Pelosi and the whole machine went into effect to raise money for Joe Wilson's opponent. And they were raising millions of dollars. And it was visible because it was on Act Blue. And that was the only way that they were raising money. So we immediately went into place, and I called every blogger I knew, and immediately got Joe Wilson on the phone with a message that he's being attacked for telling the truth, and that this is about standing with Joe Wilson, standing for truth, and completely shifted the debate. We raised millions of dollars with email, of course, but we also broke it down, raised money with Facebook on regular advertising, like Drudge Report advertising. And Twitter, interestingly enough, it was the place where I spent the least amount of my time, but it was the place where I captured the entire, Plato's cave, right? It captured all of the attention of the media. So I could send out one tweet, and that would be big news, and Chuck Todd and these guys would promote it and talk about this tweeting, and I was on Drudge Report, an article about me about doing this stuff and tweeting, and really the whole time I was spent on the backside of things, just trying to raise money and keep our donation pages up, and ultimately we were able to show that we raised so much money. So in fact, to answer your question, is it more than that? I think that's one example of the fact that social media is the only way forward. Especially when you've got the imagination of the entire nation, you have to be able to capture that in every single possible channel.
Mm-hmm.
So that's actually an amazing example, because I think prior to the arrival of social media, there perhaps would have been a New York Times story about the State of the Union. They would have mentioned the Joe Wilson thing, and because it was out of the ordinary that a member of Congress would stand up, interrupt the speech, and say something, although it was a nanosecond, right? Then there might have been and that would have been on the front page. And then buried inside, on the national page, would have been a 2-column story about what happened. And no one in Congress would have been on the record about it, talking about their colleagues across the aisle or on the same side of the aisle. And that would have been about it, and perhaps something on the evening news. So I believe that's how the old world would have worked. With social media, everybody knew about Joe Wilson, and you're either on my side or your side of the issue, and you're sending stuff around Facebook, and you're engaging, right, in a way that so many more people knew about this than would have from reading those 2 articles on that one day in the New York Times. So, and there would have been the fact that people are talking about it. I mean, that's what happens on social media. There is a conversation that's now happening that wouldn't happen unless you were on the party line in 1965 of your neighborhood's phone, right? Anybody remember party lines? But you can't talk to a whole group of people like you can on social media. So that, I think, is a fascinating example. From a campaign practitioner point of view, we are always talking about the ladder of engagement, and we're talking about channels of communication, because our job, not to hit the mic, is our job is to communicate to as many people as possible about and market our candidate or our initiative or whatever it is we're working on. So I now look at social media as a channel of communication for my campaign. And I only talk about Facebook and Twitter because that's sort of the 2 main things right now, and there will be more. And Instagram, perhaps, is the next thing. And we segment those. The way I look at it, and with my campaigns, is Twitter is, and this goes to your point as well, is where I communicate message and things that I want insiders to know and that I want the press to know. Hence the Chuck Todd picking up on what you were saying, but you were spending the least amount of time there. And Facebook is where I get supporters and activists ginned up, talking to each other, doing more, blah, 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 blah. So that's sort of the way we think about the channels. And then the ladders of engagement, and that's to your point about email. Email is still the thing where it's still the best way to get people to give money online. Mm-hmm. It is still the best, often still, I would say, the best way for them to sign a petition, take an action, do something like that. And what we're trying to figure out is how you get all those Facebook likes and move them over so you can communicate with them on email until the Facebook likes can turn into something else other than mostly it's just activity on Facebook. So the ladder of engagement is important, and there's different tools that we use to get people to engage more and more and more in the campaign.
And if people are talking to each other, you mentioned there's a lot of communication and interaction. Are they interacting on social media with people they agree with already? I mean, how much interaction is there across the ideological divide, if any? Or does social media actually increase polarization and tend to put people into silos and they communicate with like-minded? Somebody want to? Anybody can jump in on that.
Sure. I mean, look, I can sort of give, I guess, the academic perspective on this is that, a lot of what I think we're describing here is these moments of partisan mobilization. So mobilization among already engaged camps, politically aware people, politically attentive people. And then I think to David's point is that you can leverage platforms like Twitter to then get professional press attention to it. And when the professional press covers it, then it sort of radiates outward to the more general audiences, the people who are less attentive, members of the issue publics who might, be somewhat aware, but not necessarily watching the State of the Union live or 24-hour cable news broadcast all the time. I think there's a couple different realities of the people we tend to affiliate with tend to be like political views to us. That's not to say all the time. I mean, we do have some cross-cutting networks that would be, people who might be of a different party than we are. But certainly one of the dangers here is that we only get sort of the information that we already agree with, and then those of us who are most politically aware will just choose to only to basically refute the arguments we already disagree with. So in the end, you sort of see social media yoked to these larger processes of partisan contention, not necessarily creating a deliberative forum.
But it makes it easier to do that, right? It makes it I mean, isn't the general thrust of technology that in the old days we would have all been watching the CBS Evening News and would have received at least some information we might disagree with? And if I'm just on Facebook with people who I agree with already, or sending around, forwarding an email, that technology tends only to exacerbate the ability to live in a world where I only meet people I agree with. Is that right, wrong?
Yeah, I mean, Eli Pariser, founder of Move On, he gave a great TED Talk. I think he may have written a book about it too, but he talks about the filter bubble that we're all kind of in with regard to our friends and what they talk about, et cetera. Or religion, I think, is another good example of that, where you see people post something about religion and you're like, what? And click, remove, that type of thing. You sort of self-select what you want to see and what you don't want to see. But, I feel it a lot out here. I mean, I'm a Republican, not in the stereotypical sense, what people think about when they're a Republican. But everyone I meet is like, well, I grew up with Democrats, so I'm a Democrat. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? That's like that's like saying I grew up in a certain religion, and therefore I am. I'm unable to think. So I think, and I'm not trying to, whatever, but it just...
we can indoctrinate you later if you'd like. We've got special potions in the back that will be...
Let me pivot this away from being lovey-dovey about our candidates and our causes and tell you how politics really works, and that is to destroy the other candidate. And so having those clusters of folks online is helpful when, for example, when George Bush was the antagonist, right? Everyone galvanized behind him. It didn't matter who the other side was, what he wanted, it was just change. It's not George Bush. And so I think that's something important to remember. Joe Trippi, Howard Dean's campaign manager, stole a line from Glenn Reynolds, with due credit, who's a blogger, Instapundit, conservative, talking about how social media really empowers the armies of Davids to take down the Goliath. And the fact is that the Goliaths are very easy to spot these days. And social media, whether or not you're getting a balanced diet of politics, I mean, most people just don't want to talk about it because they don't care. They're like focusing on their family and friends, and that's what social media is for, right? So yeah, I know I'm sort of off on a few tangents here, but just don't forget that it does help to have a whole group of people that agree that we don't like that person, and we're going to go and support this person.
It helps the campaign. It helps any given campaign to have a whole bunch of people that agree. Mm-hmm. I guess my broader question is, does it help all of us generally? Is it really a good thing to just communicate with people you agree with?
No, that would be my opinion. But this is sort of my individual experience in social media is that particularly on Facebook. I have people who are friends from when I was 7 and now. And I'm not the same person I was when I was 7. And so, there are a lot of people with a lot of different opinions. And I watch their posts, and, it all depends on our personalities. My personality is, I see their post, I don't agree with it, I note it, I move on. I don't engage, because I don't want to argue with someone. I do that for a living, so I don't need to do that on my own time. But I have a friend who is equally as partisan as I am, went to the Kennedy School, has this broad, fabric of friends, and they get into it. I mean, there are like 70 comments on some snarky post that he makes about politics, and they're just going. And he loves it, and they all love it. So I don't think it has to be about groupthink, or I only want to listen and be talking to people who agree with me. I think social media it's actually allowed me to see a lot of different sides of people that I know, but didn't know what they thought about religion or politics.
Mm-hmm. When you mentioned earlier that email is still the best way to raise money, and obviously money is still the mother's milk of politics, to quote Jessandra. When you raise the money, it's still the case that most of it goes towards television, right? It's not towards social media. It's still the old media of TV ads that is kind of at the heart and the soul of campaigns, at least in terms of what they spend their money on. Is it still the case that even with, yes, Twitter's taken off like a hockey stick. I came across one stat, the number of tweets on Election Day in 2008, just 4 years ago, is equal to 6 minutes of tweets today. So yes, it's taken off. But at the end of the day, is television still sort of the dominant method of communication, or now has social media surpassed that?
Well, I mean, television is still far and away the dominant method of communication in political campaigns, and I think there's always a lag behind. I mean, this is actually a really interesting question about it, and I'm curious to hear what you guys say about this. This is a real interesting question of what happens here, right? So fundamentally, I would say during the Kerry campaign in 2004, I think the Kerry campaign spent, maybe $5 on cable. And there was, a lot of argument after the campaign. Well, and the Republicans did a much better job of using cable and targeting cable in that campaign, and were very smart about it. And you're on calls with Democratic media consultants today, and they're all talking about the power of cable, right? So I think the political spectrum in terms of sort of where the money really goes for communication is a little bit behind, but it's clearly catching up. I mean, the question is, what does the media spend of the campaign look like 20 years from now? And I think Obama spends a tremendous amount of money on the internet, tremendous, more so than anybody. And I don't think that's filtered down. I'd be curious on the Republican side. That's filtered down into campaigns that are non-presidential. But I mean, if you look at where people spend their time, I mean, they spend their time on Facebook, and the ability.
You mean average people, or campaigns fundamentally spend their time on Facebook?
The average person spends more time on Facebook than on, they spend like 22 minutes a day on Facebook. It's an enormous amount, and they self-select, as we've all been talking about. And so your ability to get in there with content, right, that engages them, that will penetrate the world they've set up for themselves, right? Because, I mean, fundamentally what social media has done is it's allowed us to customize the way we view the internet and the world all the time, right? In the old days of the internet, you'd go to Yahoo and you'd figure out what the cool links were and you'd go check it out. I mean, now you log on and the 30 things that you like to do on the web that day are all there right around you at your fingertips, right? And so you've got to penetrate that enclave. And, most media consultants today will say, well, because of the DVR, which is actually one of the most important pieces of this conversation that's not related to social media, but is really driving a lot of this to some degree. I don't know what the most recent stats are, but a tremendous number of shows are DVR and people aren't watching commercials. So the current solution to that problem is we'll just buy more TV, right? Well, if you bought 1,000 points last year, you got to buy 2,000 points this year. So basically the people who aren't using DVRs are getting bound with commercials. But how that changed and how the media spend changes around social media and what that evolves into, and are you going to see a scenario where people are doing several $100,000 YouTube buys? Because I mean, you can narrowcast that YouTube buy based on the self-serve platform that are going right now. That piece is really behind, in my opinion. But over the next 15 or 20 years, I think you'll start to see a real significant change. Right now, TV is far and away the dominant medium.
24% of California's voters watch less than an hour of television a week. So
Wow.
if you're a campaign, we stipulate it's true what Theo says, that television is still the most effective way to communicate with voters, persuasive communication. You want to change their minds or bring them to your side. So if 24% are only watching an hour's worth of TV a week, what are we to do? Well, we love mail still, so everything you were saying about micro-targeting, absolutely. But now everyone's looking at online ads. Now, this is different than advertising in social media, so we need to make that distinction, because really I think the most, you may correct me, but the most effective advertising in social media right now is for campaigns is on Facebook. Twitter, there's really nothing there. But in terms of online advertising in general, that's where that money, that's where they're trying to target those 24% of California voters, both with with mail and with online advertising. And it is primarily, there are initiative campaigns that are spending $2 million to advertise online. So this is pre-roll that you see on news sites. This is display advertising. So, it's of course the cookies, the remarketing. So you go to, the Yes on 35 website, they put a cookie on you, and then, Yes on 35 pops up everywhere. And you can click and listen to a video or see a video of, so on and so forth. And then there are and then a teeny tiny little piece of that's going to be advertising on social media. But, there's some mayor in upstate New York who claims he won his race because of Facebook advertising. So, did you run that campaign?
No, I didn't. But if you look at, Facebook will, no, I did.
Yeah, claim it. Go ahead.
If you look at Facebook put out I can't remember exactly what the stat was after the 2010 election, right, which is an off-year election, so it's much more partisan. And I think it was something like 74% of the 95 competitive congressional races that won, the candidate that won had a larger Facebook following. There's obviously a lot of other factors that go into that, but that's not a bad sort of top-line leading indicator, I think. I think this is the real big question, right? Because on a macro level, it's people create their own community. They see what they want to see. They build their community around it. And honestly, they're not watching a lot of TV. And if they are, it's DVR'd. If you want to change somebody's mind, you have to find a way to get into that bubble. And you can do it through some retargeting. You can do it through online ads. But you have to find a way in there. People have to want to see that content. And I think you'll see over the next 3 or 4 campaign cycles a lot more movement to online viral video content that people want to share, that people want to see. To start to see a lot of experimentation around how do you break into that person's world and get them to pay attention to you.
Mm-hmm. And just one more comment on that. We talk about interruptive advertising. That's the most effective advertising. So TV's an interruptive advertising. DVRs have made it a little less interruptive, but you're watching TV, all of a sudden there's an ad, you're interrupted, you're watching the ad. Mail is theoretically interruptive advertising. It shows up in your mailbox, it's there, it's in your hand. Obviously, you have the choice of whether you throw it out or read it. Online ads, we're still trying to figure out, and social media, and Facebook ads in particular, they're over there in the corner, right? I don't pay any attention to what's going on over there. And most of the time they think I'm like a gay man because they have the weirdest, I don't know what I must be looking at, but they have the weirdest ads on the right-hand side.
It's all that action you've got on the Village People page.
Exactly,
that's confusing.
exactly. So,
maybe we better not go there, Katie.
No,
just
no,
keep going.
I'm just moving right through that. But you will find that I just saw somebody say, "Why is Facebook putting ads in my news feed today?" So Facebook is now trying to figure out how to make their ads more interruptive because they're going to be more persuasive and effective. And then we'll buy more of them and they'll make more money.
David, do you want to get in on this? I assume you agree that over the course of time will we see moving away from television and more towards...
Yeah, I think we could look at different metrics, though. If anyone in this room were going to run for anything, and I mean anything, dog catcher or anything like that, you all know you would have a website, you would have a Facebook profile, and you would have a Twitter account. That's all you need to know about where it's all going, is that it is now happening. And 5 years ago, 4 years ago, that was not the case. Everyone is educated about these tools. Whether or not they're valid doesn't matter, because we're making them valid just because candidates are using them and no one wants to be without. So I think that's something to keep in mind. It's like you can't stop it, and there's really only one way to go up. But ultimately, man, I think we're going to see a really strong, I hope, a strong pushback to analog in everything we do in life. But especially with politics, the debates are really important, and they've grown with importance. That's because people have become generally informed, and they're paying attention for a lot longer than they used to. So the ideas of persistent campaigns, it's not persistent campaigns, it's storytelling, and they're telling their story over and over and over again through different channels. So that's something to keep in mind. I think people want more town halls. They want more opportunities to meet people. When I met John Kerry, I was blown away at how cool that guy was. But it just didn't come off that way. But until you meet him, it's like, not sure if I want to be around this guy.
He's a lot cooler in person.
He is very cool.
Yeah, no, he's a guy's like 60 years old. He plays hockey. He goes kiteboarding. I mean, he's ridiculous. I mean, he's in better shape than most 30-year-olds. Well, can I ask David a question?
Absolutely.
I'm curious. When you say return to analog, what do you mean by that, actually? I mean, describe that to me.
Oh man, I think candidates used to go door to door, and I think that was really interesting. I think candidates actually taking more advantage of telling their story through channels in a more authentic way will happen, whether or not they want it to happen. So we're starting to see fundraisers being exploited through others holding up their camera phone, or maybe someone in here is going to put a YouTube macaca moment for me or something, the Real America, or some of these things. But whether or not they want to, you're actually getting a good sense of who that candidate really is. So beyond those of us who are trained in the art of rhetoric and persuasive, interruptive advertising, I think what you're seeing is folks see a video like macaca, and then they share it, and that's in the news feed, and it's shared from your friend, and it's like, whoa, word of mouth. And to me, that is a more analog word of mouth approach to politics than what we currently have.
It's new media, but it is more authentic.
Yeah, it's back to what I said originally, which is really empowering your activists. I mean, everyone has a camera in their phone right now that's more powerful than what they used to strap on, to shoot CNN live from here.
I was going to say, I think just to add a bit, that I think there's two important things going on here. One is, the debates and the conventions are really these wonderful focusing events that even in this world of fragmentation, people on many different platforms no longer watching live TV sort of convene around these moments. And then we do actually have good deliberative forums. So if you look at the hashtag DNC 2012 or RNC 2012, there's a robust partisan debate going on around those events and those spaces. And then people are retweeting those things or sharing them on Facebook within their social networks. So it radiates outwards from that. And also, I just sort of want to emphasize, I do think that this sharing notion is important, because this is really how campaigns will set targets. And then what they want is they want your supporters to deliver the messages to people who are in their neighborhood, right? I mean, this is what I think is so powerful behind Obama's dashboard app on your phone, right? It's all about sort of providing people with new media tools to go door to door, to talk to your friends and neighbors, and to do so in a far more decentralized way. And it's seen as sort of having the authenticity of, here's your neighbor down the block. I live here. I share the same concerns of your community. I share the same, our kids go to the same elementary school, whatever. And you can have that conversation with that voter. It could be the Obama campaign's talking points, but it's seen as being more authentic. It's word of mouth. And if I'm going to be spending my time doing it, then I'm going to be a true believer and supporter of the cause. And I think that's the area that campaigns are pushing on. And that door-to-door, both among the candidates, but also getting their supporters out in the field, having those, registering voters at events, et cetera, is an important component of that.
Is that sort of back to the future? I mean, didn't campaigns used to be, before the age of television, they were more multi-point to multi-point communication, right? You're literally going door to door. You had speakers bureaus. You had surrogate speakers going out and talking to Kiwanis clubs and so forth.
Yep.
And in the age of television, we got more centralized communication.
Yep.
We're almost going back to this is kind of your point, we're going back to what used to be prior to television in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I think, so there's a wonderful book, and I'll pitch an academic, Rasmus Nielsen wrote a book called Ground Wars, which talks about the history of a reinvestment in field campaigning at all levels over the last decade. And this personal sort of contact and all the effort and time it takes to put these things together. But also the corollary of that is that you have these social practices of democracy that now also take place online as they do in at your local farmer's market, et cetera. And all of it is part of this general reinvestment of democracy in more social forms of political communication, I think, across the board.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, David's point about authenticity is a really big one. Trippy actually, said it back in the Dean campaign in the primary, and I actually watched that because I was in the primary in 2003 for Kerry, and the Dean thing sort of happened in New Hampshire. I was the political director in New Hampshire, and we got overwhelmed by Dean for most of the primary, and it happened right in front of us. And I remember Howard Dean going on Meet the Press and doing a terrible job. All of my friends calling me up and saying, that's it, the Dean thing's over. It was a disaster. And he raised a fortune the next day. And we were like, what the? I was in we were drinking heavily during those days. In the middle of New Hampshire, it's the middle of the winter, you're losing to a guy no one ever heard of. Al Sharpton's beating John Kerry. I mean, you were doing whatever you could to make it through the day. But the point is that what was amazing about that moment, right, was that people were like, oh, Dean's authentic, right, as opposed to which is compared to the way everybody had seen candidates for the last 20 years, which is the TV phenomenon. Yeah. And the authenticity piece is a really big deal, honestly, and because you get to see into the everyday sort of lives of what they're really like. I mean, all of the big social moments, right, social media moments are all authentic moments, right? They're all either someone captured a moment that no one expected, the 47%, or Obama singing, I can't remember what was the... Al Green, right?
Together.
Or sort of these impromptu moments that make them seem real and human. It's kind of a really, can't be overlooked as a really important part of this, that people want to feel like, they understand who that person is and that authenticity.
So both of those points go back to this re-democratizing of politics. So on the field point, when I started in California politics 21 years ago, I remember a bigwig political consultant saying to me, field is dead. No more field. It's all TV. Now this is, for those who pay attention to California politics, this was 1991. So it was 5 years after Alan Cranston had retained his seat against Ed Schau only by running an unbelievable field program that, I don't know, he won by 4 votes per precinct or something, right? I mean, it was just something unreal. 5 years later, field is dead. It's, long live television. It's only about television. And so that's how we operated in this largest state of the union, 14 media markets for 15 years. And then something changed. And we are now back to running real field campaigns with real canvases, with people volunteering and feeling engaged. And I believe it is heavily attributed to the rise of the internet and then the rise of social media. And so technology is actually helping us do the old school stuff even better. And the other piece of this is this authenticity piece, which is, the Lincoln-Douglas debates were pretty awesome and pretty authentic. And, you got to go see these guys stand on stumps for hours at a time and talk about issues. Well, we don't have anything like that now, but you do actually get to see some authenticity from these candidates. And, the other related piece to this, again, talking about the canvas is, one of the foundational, I think, precepts that those of us who do campaigns believe is that there is no more persuasive voice on a campaign than a person you know and respect. Family member, friend, past, whatever, church, whatever, da-da-da. So that's what social media allows to happen now virtually in a way that used to happen when we had different lives 50 years ago. Then it became much more difficult to find those group activities where you'd be together and block parties or whatever, and that would happen. And so now we can have it happen online. And one of the things that's so interesting about, for instance, Facebook ads is if you have part of the reason that you see campaigns trying to drive so many people to like their pages is because then when you do a Facebook ad, after you have some critical mass of likes, when you see it over there on the right-hand side, or now apparently in your news feed, you will then see whether your friends have liked that ad or taken that action. So it's now not only vote for X for Congress, but you also see under there, Theo Yedinsky and 2 of your other friends have liked this. So you get more of a social context, a little bit of, this is sort of my friends talking to me and telling me to like this. Mm-hmm. So, that's social media is making all of that kind of happen in these different ways.
I want to go to audience questions in a few minutes. So if you have questions, write them on a card. A student will come around and collect them, and they'll be brought up to me, or tweet them. But before we do that, let's talk briefly, since we entitled this Tweeting Your Way to the White House 2012, let's talk about this presidential campaign just briefly. So putting aside whatever your ideological preferences are, is one campaign or the other ahead in the use of new technology? Is one side or the other doing better with the sort of new school method so far in 2012? I take that as a no.
I'm going to let David go first on that one.
Obama was very good at raising huge amounts of money in small donations via email in 2008, correct? Is the Obama campaign still at the head of the field?
Yeah, I mean, the app that you just told me about sounds incredible. I mean, that does sound very exactly what they should be doing and how they should be using technology. I know they had an app in 2008 that was actually just built by volunteers, which is pretty cool.
The iPhone, I mean, it was, you brought up the Obama. The Obama app in 2008 was great, actually. It would search through your contacts and it would pull out all your friends in swing states and ask you to contact them. It was really, really well done. Which brings up the whole other question, by the way, which we haven't talked about, which is, all this will be mobile, by the way. 68% of all social networking now is done on a mobile phone. So that's the direction. I guess I would say that, look, obviously I'm biased about this, and I'm not ashamed to be biased about it. But I mean, Obama's been very good about it, and they're very smart about it. I think they've done a couple things this cycle that have really stood out to me. Stephanie Cutter did the video responses to ads and attacks that the Romney campaign did, which I thought was quite effective, and they got a lot of push around through social and did quite well. And the recent 47% flap for the Romney campaign, I honestly thought they didn't really handle that very well in social. I went and looked at the Romney page right when this was happening, the Facebook page, not the website. And there just fundamentally, there weren't really the tools there, or either the images to share or the messages. It didn't really feel like there were the tools there for if you're an average Romney supporter or you're on the Facebook page about what you could do to try and push back or stop it. To your point about Joe Wilson, right? Which is a really well organized, well run operation. I just felt like they sort of haven't quite hit that sweet spot around it, and the Obama folks are very good at it. I don't know whether that's a function of just sort of Romney's campaign, but that one surprised me, honestly. I thought that they really didn't they didn't put anything out for any of their activists to try and help them push back, and that was surprising to me. Maybe I missed it, but that was my impression.
Yeah, and I just looking at those two campaigns, Barack Obama, whether or not it was true, which we all think it was true, but it was proven. The use of new media for him in 2008, it proved effective, proved a valuable return on investment. I'm friends with all of those guys, of course, who ran that, and some of them are back in there, et cetera. They talked the talk after. I mean, they took what they learned and took it into the White House and did a lot of really impressive things, and continue to use new media, which how much longer is this stuff new? But they're using all of the tools to get their message out and to have a point of view. that's interesting, for them and others. So I don't think you could ever discount Barack Obama and what they did. With regard to Mitt Romney, yeah, I've got some friends who are sort of on the inside who left San Francisco to work in that effort, and it's a disaster. And ultimately, that's the same problem that's why a lot of folks are leaving sort of that work, because ultimately it is still run, just going after the thinkless masses, the folks who are undecided to watch TV, and that's where all the money and that's where all the budget goes. But ultimately, that's also where all the glory goes for those folks too. But ultimately, so what does that really mean? Well, and after the 2000 race, it was John McCain who raised like $1 million overnight. And so the consultant that did that on the Republican side kind of swept up all the Republican candidates, and then you've got like little fighters here and there who kind of pick them off, and it's more distributed also. But ultimately, Republicans look at online as a money machine, as an ATM. And I think Barack does too. I mean, I'm not going to act like he's some glorious, there's neither one of them are truly storytelling. They're still just using it to raise money.
You think they should be using it to tell stories?
Yeah, I think so. More authentically, yeah.
And I'll sort of chime in with my 2 cents from the outside perspective. I think one of the things that made Obama a success in 2008 was the fact that they gave new media a senior staff position on the campaign. And the organization of that campaign meant that new media was being treated on an equal level with field, with communications, and could make claims on resources within the organization. They could have autonomy in terms of what they were doing. They didn't have to be vetted by the people who were producing the ads, et cetera. They could pursue sort of their social media strategy their own way. And I think that was really important. I think it's certainly something that's carried over to 2012 when you look at what the Obama campaign has been able to put together. What I do think, and I know David sort of has much more of an inside perspective of this, but it certainly seems to me that we have to account for the fact that the candidates are different. They have different targets. They have different bases of support. I think one reason why we see so much of the Obama campaign investing on sort of integrating social media with field campaigns is because their volunteer networks look different. Their volunteer networks are drawn to the candidate, whereas the Republican Party has traditionally had other means, whether it's through churches or faith-based groups, et cetera, for ways to do things like field campaigning. And it could be that demographics look different. Target demographics look different, and that might account for some differences in strategy in terms of using things like social media. I don't know. It would be interesting to sort of talk to folks after election and see that extent. But I will say one sort of final thing, and it seems to me that when we think about social media use, one of the Obama campaign's targets, I think, are women 40 to 60 years old. And they are one of the most active demographics, from what I hear from folks inside, talking about politics on Facebook. And that explains, I think, in one sense, one of the key components of the Obama campaign in terms of their outreach, and why we've seen such heavy investment in things like social media. So again, this ties back into it really, the tools you have at your disposal depends in some ways, I think, on sort of what is your larger electoral strategy and what do you think you need to do to win.
One would hope that women 40 to 60 were also a target of the Romney campaign, or he's really in trouble. And I think they are. And first of all, on some level, Romney had a low bar to exceed, which was the McCain online campaign in 2008. So there wasn't a whole lot going on there. I actually think this is interesting because it again highlights to me the difference between the uses of Twitter and the uses of Facebook. So the Romney campaign, in terms of using Twitter to communicate to insiders and the press, absolutely does that 100%. I see it in the feed all the time. Twitter's where I go to get my news on a daily basis. So it's all there with all Politico and the New York Times and all the Chuck Todd, et cetera, all of the political reporters. You see that they're moving message just as much from the Romney campaign and the RNC, and in fact, the chair of the RNC is extremely active in social media, and he moves his message through Twitter quite well and is constantly engaged. So I think we should not underplay the degree to which Republicans are using online and social media. I actually think the Romney campaign is using it. I had just read something. This is the problem with Twitter, is that I see headlines and then I don't have time to actually read the article. But there was something, and so I know everything. Okay, and so
to a depth of 140 characters.
Exactly. I just like to fly at 30,000 feet. And so, so there was something about the Romney organization in Ohio and actually how good it is. And it was just in the last 24 hours that this article came out of Politico or something. And I think a lot of it has to do with social media organizing. So now we get to all go find that article and see whether the 140 characters worked for me or not in terms of comprehending what's actually going on there. But so my point is, I think they are actually using it to some degree, somewhat effectively, the Romney campaign. And you know, the Obama campaign, they're rock stars when it comes to this stuff. So you know, I don't know that you'll ever be able to, that the Romney campaign will ever be able to achieve what the Obama campaign is and has in this medium. But I certainly don't think that they're ignoring it or underutilizing it.
Nobody mentioned an incident that I thought was a brilliant use by Obama earlier this year. Smack dab in the middle of the Republican National Convention, he went on Reddit and did the Ask Me Anything thing and got 3.5 million page views. But even beyond that, got lots of free media. Every paper had a story about the president goes on Reddit and does it. It seems to me in the old days, you would have had to spend, I don't know how many millions in television advertising to jump into the middle of the other guy's convention. Is part of what social media at least has done in that case, and maybe more broadly, does it allow campaigns to do things for cheaper than they would have traditionally had to do them?
Yeah, I mean, the presidential announcement videos back in 2008 are another good example of that, where Hillary did one, and so did Barack, and to John Edwards, probably also. He was running at the time.
And we know, and we know who videoed it.
Yeah, that's it.
And we know who took the video.
Yeah, it's true, actually. Great job.
And those are free, is your point. You just put those up.
It's not free. I mean, all of it is, it in fact uses resources. And the only resources that matter in politics are time.
Yep.
And that's really it. I mean, everything else you can get money and stuff like that, and ultimately it is just the time. So yeah, I think for response, like you said, the Stephanie Cutter videos and stuff like that, and those apparently reached you, which is, you know, it's like hitting all the influential people and that type of stuff, people that are focusing on that world, the chatterers, and then reporters call you guys and they're like, what do you think of this stuff? Didn't you already know the message? And sort of brought up the speed on that. So yeah, I mean, I think David Plouffe engaging as a campaign manager, just putting out his weekly videos and that type of thing. All of those are just fantastic uses. But one point I did, and I don't want to dwell on it, but I did just want to bring up that all of us in the, you know, when I was doing political consulting and sort of everyone, we're all just hacking these technologies. I mean, none of these technologies were created for this purpose. And the technology is still, that technology is still light years away from what it actually needs to be to fully provide both the consumers and the candidates what they want, the customers. So, you know, I think, you know, the challenge is in fact on, you know, not just, they all just want to sell ads to candidates, and that's why the whole game is out there, and you need likes and this kind of thing, and you hear about how it all works. But the reality is their technology is pretty weak for what it will be in 5 to 10 years. And once someone with actually any sort of real understanding of how technology works puts some intention to what it would actually take to build a sophisticated device to help organize better and really take advantage of all the data that is out there. And so that's when it gets interesting. I mean, when you've got a button that you can push that gets that message out to everyone across every channel, regardless of screen, whether it's their primary screen or, you know, the second screen phenomenon, or, you know, any of that type of stuff. So I think those are the interesting things that are yet to come.
I mean, campaigns love social media because, you know, they don't have to go through the media anymore to tell you what they think.
Exactly.
I mean, that's why candidates, I mean, you know, Gavin Newsom loves it. He could just tweet out what he thought. 1 million people see that. Before, he would have had to talk to Carla Marinucci, hope that she would, you know, get his message correctly and then write the story. And then, you know, I mean, politicians love it because it's a control for them. You know, they have so much more access to the everyday person to say what they want. I mean, their megaphone is so much bigger now than it used to be.
Right. Although this is also why they liked the 30-second commercial versus the news conference, because you could say what you wanted in.
I mean, look, the danger of it is, of course, is someone can go on your Facebook page and say, hey, why did you support that tax raise? And you're like, well, I don't really want to answer that question. And so then but that's there. And so it's a two-way street. And some politicians embrace that and some really struggle with it. But I mean, the ability to talk directly to all of those people without it being filtered, that's a new phenomenon. I mean, it wasn't during the Dean campaign, right? People were screaming that bloggers had put up reports about what happened at that house party that day, that afternoon. They didn't wait for the next day's news cycle. That was lunacy. Like, those people are crazy. It's like, how dare they do that? Now it's like you can tell anybody instantly. The level of direct access for politicians, which they really like, right? Because it allows them to defend themselves and makes them feel more empowered. It's really it's a big deal, and it's also what's driving their activity on that.
I also can't, if I can,
Yeah.
just can't overstate David's point about the most limited resource we have in campaigns is time. People always think it's money, but it's time. And the great thing about technology is it has saved us so much time. We can raise money faster and cheaper. We can communicate faster and cheaper. We can push out message. We can do stuff instantly. It's all there. And recruiting volunteers. Actually, I still think the best way to recruit volunteers is to call them on the phone and ask them to come into the office to walk precincts. But you can actually use technology to get people to come into the office and do things, and that saves a lot of time. So that piece is just incredibly critical and a huge change to campaigns, even more than the money-saving piece, I think.
We've got some excellent questions from the audience, so let's do those. What are the demographics of people using social media? Which groups are excluded by these tools? Daniel, do you want to talk? Is there a danger here that some people, because they're not either using social media or offline, they're not even online, are we losing people? Or would they not have been involved to begin with?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so there's sort of where are we at now and then the long arc, right? Where are we going with this? I think that there's certainly, there continues to be a digital divide. It's a divide in terms of who sees social media as being relevant for them, who sees social media as being relevant for them in their civic lives, their political lives, et cetera. Those are cultural skills. Those are things people learn, et cetera. I think that one of the things here that is also sort of hanging at the backdrop of it is that we still are in a world where even in the most contested presidential election in history, you have 66% of the American public voting, right? That's a massive amount of the electorate that still is disengaged. So despite all of the new tools, the ways of reaching people, the interconnections of our lives, I think one of the fears is that more and more people can sort of just opt away from having to see any political content at all or be exposed to any civic content at all. And we'll have a new sort of divide, one between sort of the politically attentive and the non-politically attentive. And that has the potential to be exacerbated in some ways with social media when we introduce more and more choice and don't necessarily have those larger political events that everyone tunes into. My own thought on that is that I think, ironically enough, the more partisan we get, the more participatory we will get until a point, because then it will turn people off. It turns people who are the least attentive off at some point down the line.
Does anybody else want to weigh in on that quickly?
I would just say that traditionally the digital divide, the people who've been left out have been communities of color and lower income folks. And I think Theo mentioned mobile, and that is going to be the answer, I believe, to that problem. Primarily right now, communities of color access the internet on their mobile device. So we are all trying to figure out now how we move political messaging to the mobile device. And so, I think in a short amount of time, we will see that divide start to shrink.
I think it's a species argument. I mean, more people have more access to more information than they have ever had at any point in the history of mankind. And I don't think that means that there's not a digital divide, but there was a cultural divide before where, communities of color or poor people had, fewer books or fewer resources in the library. I mean, that issue has always existed in society. If anything, access to social media, the internet, and information is slowly eating away at that, I would say. So I don't, I think, if anything, it's the empowerment, not the other way around.
Do candidates pay attention to what people are saying on social media? So we've talked a lot about candidates communicating with folks. How much do campaigns listen back?
Depends on the campaign.
Yeah.
Depends on the politician who's willing to take the risk. Some politicians don't, want it to be there, and they're like, get me on social media, and I want to be able to talk to people and tell them my point of view when somebody attacks me, and that's it. And if they want to complain, well, that's their problem. And some politicians, I think, take it to heart and really want to have two-way conversations. I think it depends totally on the personality.
I think it also depends on the campaign. I mean, initiative campaigns are paying a lot of attention to what's being said on social media about their issues and about their initiative. And maybe that's an issue thing versus a candidate thing. So the campaigns are paying a great amount of attention to what people are saying about the stuff, their campaign that's on the ballot.
David, you agree it depends on the campaign, but at least in some cases they sort of listen back?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, it's the severity of the moment. I think, George Allen knew what happened with regard to Makaka. He knew about that, and he knew what happened because of Wikipedia, and then he read my blog, and, this kind of stuff. He knew, and then when I met him, we talked about it. So, that had an effect that was direct. The presidential candidates, they're really busy. I mean, they don't have time to consume their Facebook news feed and sort of respond to questions. But then they do the Ask Me Anything on Reddit, as you pointed out. I think that's a really good example of a good use of time. And then I love what you brought up about the sort of the ballot initiatives and those folks. I mean, they are in fact listening, which is cool. And that I walk my dog in San Francisco, and I just want people to clean up their trash or more trash cans. So I'm going to go to the mayor's Ed Lee. He's working on innovation this month, so we should give him a plug for making Innovation Month San Francisco. But sorry, over there. But yeah, so I think it's mayors, are listening, and they're establishing times, just like forums and town halls, where they will listen and participate.
And we're guilty of something here that we probably should all just take a moment to recognize, which is, down ballot races. So you mentioned mayor's races, school board races, community college trustee races, water board races. There's always drop off on the ballot because people don't know who to vote for. There's nonpartisan judge races. What do I do with? I don't know, but I haven't heard from these people. Those campaigns can run their campaigns on social media, and those candidates actually will be interacting with you. And so I think actually that one of the good things about social media is that may actually help increase participation further down the ballot where there's been this drop-off for years and years and years.
This is a question which I think goes to money, which we talked a little bit about earlier, but I'm curious what you all think. Discuss how social media is or is not an antidote to Citizens United. I suppose that presumes that we need a response to Citizens United, but again, I think this goes back to money. By reducing the importance of money, does it get at some concerns about the Citizens United ruling, or no? Katie, you're looking very doubtful. A well-funded IE can still crush.
It's like
you go first.
Well, it's like if you gave me the choice of two campaigns, I can take the $10 million, from company X that's funded through Citizens United, or $500,000 in a scrappy social media campaign and a good idea. Probably taking the $10 million bucks. I don't know about you guys, but I guess.
Spoken like a true consultant.
Yeah, well, no, I just mean in terms of the odds of winning. Look, campaigns that don't have a lot of money, right? Invent, right? I mean, necessity is the mother of invention. If you don't have a lot of money, you will use everything that you can think of, which are all the free social media tools, to try and communicate to anybody. Does that basically equate to, a humongous TV buy that blankets voters all across the state and tells them what to think? I mean, no. I mean, it helps a little bit, if you have a good cause. But those can't, that's the exception, not the rule, right? The Howard Dean campaigns, right? The things that get a cause that catch fire, those are the exception, not the rule.
I think it depends on the campaign. So my guess is we'll take a look at the presidential race in December of this year and say Citizens United ultimately did not change the balance. And, the massive influx of money didn't change the balance, and, Barack Obama was reelected. So that's what I think we'll be saying in December. Now you go down to congressional races. We may be saying in December, Citizens United made a huge difference. The Democrats got 15 seats back, but they needed, 10 or 15 more, and they just couldn't get there because of the massive influx of money. Now, why is that? That's because there's so much information out there about the presidential race, but in these individual congressional races, not as much. And so does social media play into that? No, not yet, maybe, but I just don't think, I don't think we're there. I don't think social media is at a place yet where we can counter the spending of money. And I will also tell you, I sit around on campaign calls and have conversations like, how much are we going to spend on Facebook ads? So I'm spending money to advertise on social media. So that's sort of that should answer your question.
It's an important dynamic because I think you go all the way down, right? So most of the political science literature tells us that television advertising is effective in low information races. Yeah. So races where you have no idea who's running for dog catcher, right? I think what you'll see in the long run is these big influxes of money into these down ballot races, all the way down to the state house races. And they'll make a big difference in the long run over that. Those are the places where raising money, perhaps over social media, is going to be doubly challenging, right? Because you can do it easier at a presidential level, where you have donors all over the country, who are they're identified by party. They can be giving these small dollar donations, and they accrue over time, which is the story of the Obama campaign. But I think that when you start dealing with smaller geographic areas, where your donor pool is less in races that are not as salient, then that's really where you're going to see the effects of Citizens United show up.
And we should be clear, we're not raising money on social media right now, right? The only thing that so one of your questions was, right? We're raising money online. You create all this buzz and excitement and engage your supporters on social media, and then hope that somehow you've gotten their email addresses, you put them into your email database, and you're blasting solicits to them and hope that they're excited enough that they give.
One quick final question, which I'm going to amend slightly. The question is, would anyone address fact-checking and how the internet enables this? But I'm going to broaden that and say, do the new technologies really create greater accountability? Are people able to hold candidates or campaigns or office holders more accountable? Or I suppose, alternatively, does it work the other way? Are those technologies sometimes enabling people to tell a story that may not be entirely accurate?
Definitely more accountable. I mean, a couple quick examples. During the 2006 cycle, I can't remember, it was a Republican member of Congress who posted a photo saying, "This is a square in Baghdad or an intersection in Baghdad, and look how peaceful it is." The left is overstating it, and it turned out a bunch of bloggers on Daily Kos went after it for an entire day. It turned out it was an intersection in Turkey. I don't know any reporter that would have done that work. I think I would say more accountable.
You all agree?
Absolutely.
I'm a little more mixed on this. I think on one hand, we certainly do have a broad distributed sort of network of potential fact checkers. I think that at the same time, we have more possibility to circulate false claims and to have, information that is not true sort of live in certain communities and conspiracy theories at the same time. And that in some ways, you can also see sort of mobilization of falsehoods that sort of seek to challenge what other people are saying. And
that's certainly true.
I'm a little bit more skeptical. And then I also would say, sort of layer this onto this, is that some of the political science literature ironically shows that people who are the least engaged remember the misleading claim and not the fact check. And this is the story of the Swiftboat Veterans for Truth, right? So everyone remembers that ad. Everyone remembers the controversy around it. Nobody remembers any of the fact checks that came out around the Swiftboat veterans. And that's the general phenomenon. So to the extent that we have more fact checking, I'm also saying that maybe it's good for the most engaged among us, but perhaps when we start to get down into all we remember are these controversies that surround, or most of the public only remembers these controversies. So I think it's a complicated and a great question that I don't think we necessarily have the answers to.
On that ambivalent note, I think we'd better end. For students who are here, I want to briefly mention one of the things the Matsui Center does is internship programs. There's information on a table as you leave. If you want to get practical political experience in Washington, Sacramento, local government, please pick up a brochure, go to our Facebook page, go to our web page, look that up. There's a reception just outside. And as was mentioned earlier, we have debate watching parties. First one is Wednesday night, 6 o'clock. We hope you'll come and join us. Please join me in thanking the panel. Thank you.